Alright, so I'm going to rank all the healers on a scale of, I guess you would say, S to E, like a normal tier list, for both power and then a separate list for fun. I'm going to be using the meme horse that I like, so the well-drawn side of the horse is S, and it gets progressively worse the more right you go. I'll also I'll have a little section at the end of the video for a conventional tier list for people who want to click straight to that. Before I get started, I want to say that every healer can heal through all of the unavoidable kind of normal damage patterns or mechanics in Mythic Plus at the moment. So in my opinion, the meta is going to come down to how much damage they deal, what utility they bring for the group, and the power of their personal defensive cooldowns, or their ability to stay alive. I'd also like to give a quick thanks for everyone for putting up with my terrible mic quality. I've got a new microphone lined up as a Christmas present, so you won't have to put up with this for too much longer, hopefully. I'm also going to be complaining a lot about healers. All I'm really focusing on in videos like this is the weaknesses or the lacking aspects of specs. So even though it sounds like there's a lot of problems, there really isn't. I've said it before, and I guess I'll say it again. I think all healers at the moment are more closely balanced than ever before, actually, in WoW's history, or at least as long as I can remember. I don't think there's any really bad answer here. You really can pick what you like to play and play it, and I don't think you'll have problems getting into groups or completing content or anything like that. The difference between the best healer and the worst healer is not much at all. And I'm going to try and cover why I'm placing specs in certain categories. So we will start off with Holy Priest. Holy Priest, I think, along with most other healers, is A tier. So when I'm talking about why I'm placing healers in certain categories, I guess you can think of it as why isn't every healer in S tier? And I know that most people use S tier as like an extremely exclusive tier, that there should only ever be like 1 or 2 specs in S tier. I'm using S tier as more of a, there are no problems with this spec tier, rather than this will be the meta healer tier, if that kind of makes sense. Now, why isn't Holy Priest in S tier? First of all, its AoE throughput is conditional on stacking, which means you could say that its spread AoE healing is not very strong at all. I also think that Holy Priest kind of lives and dies with Apotheosis, and that is because Divine Hymn, like a lot of other kind of 3-minute raid cooldown type healing abilities, that just aren't very strong in Mythic Plus. I think Divine Hymn is quite weak. If I'm thinking about healing an upcoming party-wide damage event or something, I'm not planning on using Divine Hymn pretty much ever. Which, like I said, means that it feels like the only cooldown you really have is Apotheosis. That isn't necessarily a weakness of the spec, but it is certainly a limitation that some other healers don't have. I also think that its single target healing isn't particularly good, and that is because Lightweaver, which is the kind of go-to spot healing talent, left side of the tree build, it isn't as strong as Flash Concentration was. Now, Lightweaver is definitely a more streamlined, better version of Flash Concentration mechanically, but it isn't as powerful. It probably needs a numerical buff. The other option for spot healing is Divine Word, and while that is strong, it is conditional. It is a 1-minute cooldown, a low uptime, and if it isn't up, your spot healing is considerably weak. Holy also lost some damage from the Imperium Blaze nerf recently that took the cooldown from 30 seconds to 60 seconds. Now, Holy Priest probably has some of the highest, if not the highest, burst single target damage, but its AoE damage is very lacking compared to what other healers have. Simply pressing Divine Star and Holy Nova just doesn't compete, unfortunately. I also think that not having a kick really hurts Holy and Discipline, and that is more than anything because it feels like Dragonflight dungeons are quite kick heavy, and we are quite literally in a position where groups are going to be picking a healer with a kick if they pick anything other than Priest. I don't think every group requires 5 kicks, but like I said, if they can pick any other healer and have 5, why would they pick the one that only gives them 4? Unless that healer brings something that no other healer brings. And that at the moment is PI. The question becomes, is PI enough to make up for the deficiencies of Holy Priest? At the moment, I don't think so. I also think that their external cooldown, so Guardian Spirit, is isn't anywhere near as strong as the externals that other healers have, which makes it slightly weaker than the rest. It's also probably the least mobile healer, both pre-specs. Losing Door of Shadows or Night Phase movement ability means that really all they have is Feather. As far as fun goes, I also don't think Holy is in a particularly good spot. Personally, I really like Prayer of Mending, so having that be very powerful and bouncing around is fun to play. But particularly after the 40-40 buff, the 40% player health buff and the 40% increased monster damage buff, I found myself degenerating into a just spamming flash heal and heal playstyle that I don't find particularly engaging. So we're going to put Holy in B tier for fun. I'm also not a huge fan of Empyrean Blaze mechanically. Pressing a button to then spam another button 3 or 4 times is pretty boring. Next up will be Discipline Priest. I think Discipline is very close to Holy in power, unsurprisingly. They have the same kind of class utility, similar problems in that Disc somewhat lacks AoE healing. It does okay spreading Purge the Wickeds around, but particularly after the harsh discipline change, they're going to be spending most of their time when they're dealing damage just pressing Smite, a single target ability, which limits their damage output significantly. On AoE packs, the 30% damage buff that went through recently through Sins of the Many means their damage is still, like their overall damage in a dungeon is still quite competitive. Probably middle of the pack. I don't think it's particularly lacking, but it isn't great either. They also might run into some issues with mana, mostly on long tyrannical bosses. They spend quite a bit of mana at the moment. The way this is offset in Mythic Plus is the talent that returns, I believe, 1% of their mana when an enemy dies with Shadow Word Pain or Purge the Wicked on them. But on boss fights, something like that goes away, and they're still in a position where they will be pressing Power Word Radiance quite often, along with Mind Blast, Penance, obviously, Power Word Shield on cooldown. They don't have many good ways to kind of elongate or manage their mana. I don't think this is going to be much of an issue outside of very long tyrannical bosses though. Similar to Holy, I also don't think pain suppression is particularly good. Being a 3-minute cooldown just isn't competitive with what like Holy Paladins, Resto Druids, Preservation Evokers bring. I know it's technically the strongest damage reduction at 40%, and if you want to, you can spec into Protector of the Frail to reduce it to about 2 minutes. But even with that, it's still, I still don't think it's quite as good as something like Sacrifice or Time Dilation. Also, the biggest problem with something like pain suppression is often Disciplined Priests have to use it on themselves because Desperate Prayer just isn't a strong personal. This is also a problem that Holy shares. They just don't have a good personal cooldown, defensive cooldown button. And like Holy, Discipline also lacks a kick. They are quite fun. And they also have a playstyle that really is unique. No other healer plays like Discipline. So as far as enjoyment, Disc is still very fun for me. It's Discipline scratches an itch that no other healer scratches. The downside lately for me has been that the most enjoyable part of Discipline throughout all of beta has been working around and maximizing Twilight Equilibrium, the spell that rewards you using or weaving Shadow and Holy spells back to back. And with the harsh Discipline change and the introduction of a lot of Smite spamming, I think that playstyle kind of dies or goes away, loses a lot of its power. So that's kind of nerfed a bit of the fun for me. So I would also put Discipline in B tier for fun. Not horrible, but not great. You're also very limited in your talent selection. It seems like you basically have to play Aegis of Wrath and you have to play Harsh Discipline, so your talent options, at least in Mythic Plus, are limited. Next up on my list is Preservation Evoker. Now, Preservation Evoker is going to be S tier for me. This spec has changed a lot in the past month or so. Their mobility got buffed. Echo received a huge buff, making it instant cast. Their defensives got fixed. They had quite a few bug fixes. It's really quite the glow up spec for me at the moment. Why Preservation is S tier? I believe similar to the other healer that's going to be kind of sharing its spot in S, is that it has a lot of talent options, which I quite like. And when I say talent options, I don't mean something like Shaman that has a lot of utility talent options. I mean, Preservation has a lot of options on picking how your throughput is delivered. Being able to pick between talents that offer sustained throughput or burst throughput, being able to talent into having additional healing cooldowns, things like that is just really, really powerful at the moment. It also has excellent damage. Preservation reminds me a lot of an even better version of Vesper Totem Resto Shamans earlier on in Shadowlands, where in order to get like pretty reasonable or good damage in a Mythic Plus key, all they really had to do is press one button every 30 seconds. And that is similar to what Preservation Evoker feels like. You press Fire Breath every 30 seconds, and then if you've talented for, I believe it's called Leaping Flames, you can then press a Living Flame on an enemy right after it to then cleave Living Flames to 5 mobs. If you want to, you can spam Azure Strike for cleave, but I mean, most of your damage is going to come from just one button every 30 seconds, which is, it's really good. I also like the resource management part of Preservation, being able to fish for and bank Essence Burst procs, being able to plan ahead for incoming damage with Echo, being able to focus on stacked healing or cooldown healing or spread healing or whatever you need to do is excellent, and that's part of the reason why I would also put Preservation in S tier or fun. It also gets a bit of a bonus to be here because it's just new. It's the one healer I haven't played before for any long length of time. So learning new things and pressing new abilities and playing with new animations and stuff is enjoyable. I think Preservation also has the most depth and complexity to it of any healing spec at the moment, and I don't think it's close. I think what you can do with Echo or planning ahead for incoming damage patterns, Echo going to instant cast, it's difficult to overstate how good a change that was for Preservation. It improved mobility, spot healing, preemptive healing, essence management, all in one change. Preservation now also has excellent defensives. Renewing Blaze is incredibly strong. Their wall is very good now. They also have some built-in self-healing. As far as why they are in S tier for power, they have excellent burst healing cooldowns. They kind of make a lot of the other more conventional healing cooldowns look like not cooldowns. Things like Stasis, Rewind, Emerald Communion with Lifebind shenanigans. Those are 3 buttons that are all by themselves stronger than something like Healing Tide Totem or Revival or Divine Hymn. Like I said, they also bring excellent damage. Their utility, they bring Knockback, Knock Up, Bloodlust, Interrupt, excellent external cooldowns for your party, AoE damage reductions, mobility options. They bring a lot. Next up we have Holy Paladin. Now, if I could, I would put Holy Paladin right in between S and A. In reality, it's probably more like the bottom of S tier rather than the top of S tier. I think Holy Paladin is very powerful, but also conditional. Holy Paladins can do very good damage, especially if they can, plan out the big pools and play around them with Wings and Shield of the Righteous spam and things like that. I don't have any mana problems at all, especially for the caster build, which feels good. Now, when I talk about the caster build or the melee build of Holy Paladin, all I'm really referring to is the method of Holy Power generation. All builds of Holy Paladin effectively play the same. You're always pressing Holy Shock on cooldown, you're always spending your Holy Power on Light of Dawn or Word of Glory, or Shield of the Righteous for damage. The difference is that the melee build uses Crusader Strike and the associated talents to generate Holy Power, and the caster build leans into a more degenerate playstyle of casting Holy Light or Flash Heal on beacon targets to generate Holy Power through Tower of Radiance, I think it's called. The reason Holy Paladin is S tier for me is because its throughput, especially at 70, it might not feel that way in pre-patch, but at 70 its throughput is really quite high. It also brings very strong externals in 1 minute sacrifice, Blessing of Protection, even utility like Blessing of Freedom, and Aura Mastery is really nice. They also have strong personal defensive cooldowns. They're the only healer with an immunity in Bubble. They also bring Battle Res, 3% damage reduction for your whole party, and Blessing of Summer. So as far as damage, utility, and throughput, in my opinion, all very, very high. They're excellent. I would say out of the 3 healers I'm going to be putting in S tier, I would say Holy Paladin has probably the least throughput of those 3, but still probably more throughput than all the rest of the healers. But they also bring yeah, exceptional utility, exceptional defensives, and good damage. Like I said at the beginning of talking about Holy Paladin though, a lot of this is conditional. The throughput is going to be conditional on good play. Timing Wings well and Divine Toll and your other cooldowns well. Playing around Blessing of Dawn and Dusk well. Building and spending your Holy Power well. Like knowing when you can use your Holy Power on damage and when you need to use it for healing. Knowing what cooldowns you need to use and when. The conditions are there. You're going to have to play Holy Paladin quite well, but it is very strong. As far as the fun factor for Holy Paladin, actually not that great. Like I said, this is partly because of the degenerate playstyle of playing around Tower of Radiance, casting your heals into beacon targets to generate holy power is not ideal. The class tree also kind of sucks, having to play around Dusk and Dawn. You effectively always have to build up to 5 holy power, then spend down to 2, then build up to 3, then spend down to 0 every like 15 seconds if you're playing optimally to maximize those buffs, which isn't particularly fun. It's funny how Blizzard removed Inquisition because it was considered a tedious buff to maintain. And in the same expansion where they did the same thing for Druids and removed Savage Roar for Ferals, they've effectively given Paladins 2 buffs to maintain that are equally tedious on a 15-second cooldown. Not great. As far as Mistweaver goes, I'm going to put Mistweaver in A tier as well. Like I said at the beginning of the video, assume that all of these healers can heal through all of the mechanics necessary in Mythic Plus, which then means the real question of where they land on the power scale or in the tier list is what else do they bring other than healing, and unfortunately Mistweaver doesn't bring much. Their mana management is also somewhat lacking in my opinion. I found myself drinking on my Mistweaver more than any other healer. The caveat I would like to give when I'm talking about Mistweaver is in 90% of cases, none of the weaknesses I'm talking about are going to apply. Like Mistweavers don't have a mana problem when they don't have to cast, and most of the time they don't have to cast. The problem is how does the spec play in the few situations where you do have to stand still and just hard cast heals. That's when Mistweaver burns through a ton of mana, or they become extremely reliant on one cooldown. I also think similar to Holy Priest and Discipline Priest, their group throughput buttons like Revival for Mistweaver just is not powerful at all. It got buffed quite a lot, but that still doesn't make it good, unfortunately. I think part of the problem here is that Revival is balanced around, especially in small scale content, being able to proc 2 Gusts of Mists on every target hit by Revival, and Mastery is not balanced well for Mistweaver at the moment at all. It hasn't been balanced or tuned in any way whatsoever in Dragonflight, and yet the spec now has so many parts of its healing toolkit that don't proc or interact with Mastery at all, that Mastery is effectively a dead stat for Mistweaver now. So that is part of, I think, why Revival is weak. Its damage, I would also say, is middle of the pack. It's AoE damage, especially if you really build around it and you take things like Invoker's Delight for the haste buff and you go to town fist weaving, you're going to do a lot of damage, like bursting probably north of 70 or 80k DPS at the moment on beta on 4 targets, which is crazy high, right? Sounds great. Unfortunately, most people aren't going to play that spec for healing. It's a bit of a mean damage spec. So the average Mistweaver, the normal Mistweaver that is playing a more balanced build, isn't going to be bringing crazy amounts of damage. It also has very weak single target damage. It lacks offensive cooldowns to do big damage on larger packs like Holy Paladins with Wings, or Preservation Fire Breath, or whatever their 2-minute cooldown is, or 3-minute cooldown that does the damage. After their Discipline Priest 30% damage buff and the Resto Shaman 20% damage buff, I'd say Mistweaver's single target is the lowest of any healer, and their AoE is, like I said, middle of the pack. It's nothing exceptional to make up for their lacking single target. The utility they bring is also simply not competitive with what other healers bring. Bringing a 5% physical damage buff kind of competes with a Resto Druid, just bringing 3% versatility for everyone. But outside of that, what else do they bring? Ring of Peace, leg sweep, and I think that's about it. Their personal defensives also aren't spectacular. A lot of the times I found myself combining defensive cooldowns. It felt kind of good to have 4 of them to press, but none of them were so strong that I didn't want to press other defensive cooldowns with it. Their external Life Cocoon is, if you take the talent that buffs it from each Soothing Mist tick, it's actually kind of insane, like 200% of someone's health bar insane. But if you don't take that, like more balanced or conventional builds won't take it, then Life Cocoon, it's not a great external cooldown. It's nothing like Time Dilation or Ironbark or Sacrifice. There are also some quite powerful builds. The Enveloping build that's built around Tear of Morning and Yulon is crazy HPS, but unfortunately it does no damage. The Soothing Mist build with Jade Serpent Statue that's been recently buffed to work with Unison is also actually quite a lot of very efficient healing. Completely eliminates Mistweaver's mana problems, but again, it does 0 damage. Teachings of the Monastery going from 12% back to 15% is a nice buff, especially with the recent change to buff Rising Sun Kick by, I believe, 25%. The Tiger's Palm buff, and then the Awakened Phalanx buff that allows Tiger's Palm to hit a single enemy twice. These changes have helped a lot in Mistweaver's main lacking area at the moment, which is trying to Fistweave while hitting a single target. I still believe there are going to be bosses or situations in which Fistweaving just isn't enough throughput, and Mistweavers will be left hard casting, burning through significant amounts of mana and being extremely reliant on effectively 1 cooldown, which is a similar criticism I had for Holy Priest. Like, Holy Priest relies on Apotheosis. I think Mistweaver is going to rely on Yulon or Shiji. It's up every minute, but it's still a condition to their throughput that the S tier healers don't have. As far as fun goes for Mistweaver, I would actually put them up in the S tier. Playing the Fistweaving build, it really is great. It's a lot of fun seeing all the damage numbers pop up on your screen and then health bars jumping all over the place at the same time. It also feels great if you can play almost entirely around Fistweaving. I think for a lot of players that will be possible if you're not pushing very high keys or playing with disorderly groups. If you can play a Fistweaving Mistweaver 99% of the time, I think it'll be very fun. And a lot of the issues I talked about will go away, like their mana problems. Next up will be Resto Shaman. I think Resto Shaman goes in with A tier with the rest. There is very little difference in my mind in the power of these 4 healers. The 20% overall damage buff to Flame Shock, Lava Burst, Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, etc. has helped Resto Shaman damage quite a bit. I believe there was also a further buff to Flame Shock and Lava Burst, which has helped their single target also quite a bit. So I would say their damage is competitive, especially if you have the globals. You're playing in a very clean group and you have the globals to spend on damage. I think Resto Shaman does more damage probably than the other 3 in A tier, especially with things like Stormkeeper used well. I should actually change Resto Shaman around to be the top of A tier, because like I said, I think it brings more damage. I think it brings better burst cooldowns than the other 3 in A tier as well. Ascendance along with AG, especially with something like Stormkeeper, buff Chain Lightning with AG. Throw in Spirit Link and it feels like Resto Shaman has some decent cooldown buttons to use, more so than something like Holy Priest with Divine Hymn or Mistweaver with Revival. And this kind of burst healing is why I'm going to rank Shaman higher than the other 3. I found myself having to play around mana a bit more, which to me at the moment has meant that instead of just using Healing Surge all the time with my Tidal Waves buffs, I now use Healing Wave quite often to conserve mana but still do the healing. And that is after the 40-40 change, almost purely relying on Riptide to top people back up after they take incidental damage or something like that has been not enough. So I've had to lean more into actually casting spells. I think the main thing that hurts Resto Shaman, other than maybe some slight numerical tuning, is that they lack an external. The meta is so close at the moment that something that's been quite a small difference between Resto Shaman and the other healers for many years, for me is playing a big role in why they wouldn't be S tier. They also received a buff to Healing Tide Totem, which was quite nice. I think it was something like 40% buff. It helps, but it doesn't turn Healing Tide Totem into a strong cooldown in 5-mans, unfortunately. As far as gameplay-wise goes, I would put Resto Shaman in A tier, I think. Actually, no, we're going to put that in S tier, just because of Gusts. Having Gust of Wind back it's huge for me. It's really fun to play a healer that has what feels like proper mobility, especially if you compare it to the healers in B tier that are a little bit wheelchair category as far as mobility goes. The healers I'm putting in S all have good mobility, so that could be, yeah, quite the factor for me, I guess. I also quite enjoy playing around Cloudburst Totem. It's a playstyle that I've always enjoyed. I also like the change to tidal waves to include Chain Heal, and I like the inclusion of Acid Rain to make Healing Rain a damage button, or at least a button I press more often in Mythic Plus or small scale environments. I'm also very much enjoying the ability to do really good burst healing by doing pure damage. Pressing AG with things like Stormkeeper and things like NS feels excellent. It's a lot of fun to play. And last but not least is going to be Resto Druid. Resto Druid, I think, is the other S tier healer. But why is Resto Druid in S tier? All of its throughput types or methods of delivering healing are powerful. Their stacked healing is excellent, their burst healing is excellent, their cooldown healing can be excellent if you talent for it, their spread healing is excellent, obviously their hot healing is excellent. Resto Druids are more efficient at spreading hots to multiple targets than ever before. Things like being able to take the Rejuve spreading proc along with the talent that allows regrowth to spread to both of your Life Bloom targets lets you maintain quite a few hots on the party without having to really spend many globals for it, which feels excellent. I also believe that it's far less reliant on pure hot healing than ever before, which opens up the gameplay quite a lot. A big part of this is that the set bonus buff, which causes your efflorescence crits to increase wild growth healing, that then you can combine with Soul of the Forest, means that you can have pretty insane wild growths. In previous expansions, a big part of Resto Druid throughput for like upcoming party-wide kind of damaging mechanics was to spread hots on multiple targets. And these days, you definitely can still do that, but you also don't have to. You can do things like buffing your wild growth significantly, applying a few very easy mastery stacks through like Life Bloom with, I believe, triple mastery effect, and Efflo applying Spring Blossoms and things like that, means that you can set up your wild growth to do a huge amount of healing. I've been getting 100 to 150k healing on 5 targets. So you're talking like north of 500,000 healing in a single global, which is kind of crazy, especially given that it's effectively got a 15-second cooldown at the moment. The other reasons it's in S tier is that its damage is very good. A lot of its damage at the moment is coming purely from dots, so I don't feel the need to do a lot of cat weaving, which I enjoy. I've also found that playing an owl weaving, I guess you would call it, build a boomkin based DPS setup for Resto Druid has also been very competitive. It lacks a kick in that talent setup, which sucks. But other than that, its damage is really quite good. Its personal defensives are also, S tier along with the other 3 that are in S tier. Being able to sit in bear and leverage the higher armor or higher HP, along with frenzied regen for mana-free self-healing, the Iron Bark, very short cooldown. If you need to, you can use it as a personal or bark skin that also has the shield talent option. Yeah, Resto Druid personal survivability, their ability to just live is really, really good. Along with, surprisingly enough, the other 3 healers in S tier. As far as utility goes, they obviously bring battle res. A 3% versatility buff to the whole party is also like very, very strong. As far as fun goes, I would put Resto Druid also in S tier. Being able to play a conventional Resto Druid around and build around like stacked hots and mastery scaling and things is nice. Being able to build around a more damage-oriented setup with no mastery is also nice. Being able to also lose some reliance on your hot healing and go for things like a very beefed up wild growth, or even overgrowth if you want it, is also really quite nice. Like I said at the beginning, all of these healers are so close that picking the one you enjoy, I think, is definitely the way to go. I don't think you'll have trouble getting into groups or completing content because of the healer you pick. And I think the difference between the best and the worst healers really isn't much. Things like lacking one burst healing cooldown or lacking one strong defensive is the difference at the moment. Thanks for watching, and algorithm stuff.